First of all, Governor, thank you for taking the time to sit down, and we appreciate you making that time. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about, you had a pretty successful special session. They were in and out in 3 days. You got to sign the laws that you advocated for. I'm even going to pay you a supreme compliment. You stayed on message the entire time. We didn't divert from much of anything else other than tax cuts. Are you satisfied with the way this one went?
Yeah, I thought it was an incredibly great week, not just for me or for the legislature, but for the state of Arkansas. We went in with very clear, specific goals in mind. I'd like to say, though, too, I think I stay on message quite a bit, Roby. So
I try to knock you off as much as possible.
You try, but let's hope that doesn't happen. But we had really big things that we wanted to deliver for the people of Arkansas. Most importantly, and the biggest thing was tax cuts. And we were able to do that in a significant way, bringing our tax rate, the top level, down to 3.9%. And right now, while we're seeing so many failed policies that are coming out of Washington, inflation out of control, you think back to where we started at the beginning of Joe Biden's administration, the cost and the price of everything is up about 20%. And so people now need relief more than they ever have. And this is a great time for us to be able to put money back into the pockets of taxpayers. That's what we were able to do, not just on the income tax credit for personal side, also on the corporate side, and give a tax credit to the homestead tax credit from $425 to $500. So a big deal, a lot of money back in people's pockets, and I'm excited that we were able to do it.
I don't want to get into too much debate on this. There are some positive economic things happening in the country too. When you look at jobs and when you look at GDP and where some things are going in the state of Arkansas as well as nationally. But let's focus on this, the tax cuts that have been passed. Tell me how you market those in economic development recruiting, both the corporate cut and the personal income tax cut, because I've seen you at a lot of economic development announcements lately, and I have to think that that's a really good calling card. Yeah,
we've had tremendous success over just the last year alone. We've been able to bring in 24,000 new jobs to the state of Arkansas. So the highest labor participation and workforce that we've had in our state's history. So a lot of things going well, and when we're meeting with companies either to grow an existing footprint that they already have here in Arkansas or to bring new jobs in and to start a whole new industry. People are looking for, what does the environment look like? Are the people that are going to work in their companies going to be happy? People are generally happy when they're paying less taxes. So that's a big win. And when you're competing with Texas on one side, Tennessee on the other, and even the other surrounding states that had a lower tax rate prior to the tax cuts we passed this week, it makes it harder for businesses to want to come in because their employees aren't going to make as much money for how much they're paying them. And so it's a great recruiting tool. It's something that we hear constantly. They like what they see that we're doing here in Arkansas. Also focusing on other big things like education, workforce development. Those are the types of messages that we're taking to companies that, again, already exist in Arkansas that we want to grow, or new companies that we're trying to bring in. And clearly it's working because we're seeing a lot of investment here in the state.
Clint O'Neill with AEDC tells me the pipeline's pretty full. He's not sure it unclogs as quickly as he'd like it to because it's a presidential election year and that happens. Let's talk a little more philosophically about just tax cuts in general. I know zero is your goal for the personal income tax. I don't know if you have a goal for the corporate income tax. Is there a goal for that?
My biggest focus has been on the personal income tax side, and that's what we're really trying to focus on. There are always other ideas that come up, but I really want to zero in on phasing out the state income tax.
You would lose one leg of the alleged three-legged stool that kind of funds a lot of county and state government property taxes, sales taxes, income taxes. If you eliminate one of those legs, a lot of two-legged stools don't stand up on their own. You do run the risk of consumer spending falling and sales taxes declining, and that could present a problem. Do you ever talk to anyone about the possibility of maybe bringing the personal income tax down to a really low level so that the overall tax base is still pretty healthy and lower than surrounding states?
You know, our goal is ultimately to get to zero. How long that takes, I think, is a question we want to be responsible about it. We don't want to put our state in a bad position. But right now we feel very confident that those other areas, sales tax in particular, there's a lot of purchasing power going on in the state, and we're continuing to see extreme revenue come in from that. As you know, we've run huge surpluses the last couple of years, and not only are we running those surpluses, but we're setting that money aside to give us a little bit of a safety net, for lack of a better term. If there were, a year or two that were tough, we want to make sure that we can always fund those critical services that are really important for the state and continue investing in key priorities, which we've been able to do. And I feel confident we're going to be able to continue on that path.
I know you keep up with your critics and how they lambast you at times for some
I didn't
things.
know I had any critics.
You have
Roby.
some, I promise you. So I'll send you some names if you want. But
I'm good.
I do know some of the criticisms, I want to give you a chance to respond to this, is that we're underfunding some state services. There were some state legislators that have advocated there should be more funding for developmentally disabled people, for some of the social safety net programs, that we could be steering some money into some places. Higher education took a budget cut this year. I know you're trying to be austere with this budget, but at the same time, do you worry that you are underfunding some particular services?
I don't think so. We've been able to heavily invest across the board in ways that we haven't in the past, whether, again, on education. We made one of the single biggest investments that we've made in K through 12 education in our state's history last year with the passage of LEARNs. We're continuing to look and evaluate programs. I think that sometimes people get lost on just putting more money into a problem, but if the program's not effective, then it doesn't matter how much money you put into it. And so we're trying to make sure where we invest, it matters and it makes a difference. And I think that we have a responsibility to the taxpayers to frankly do more with less. And that's exactly what we're doing. I don't feel like we've underfunded critical services, but I'm happy to meet with legislators. I do it on a daily basis and talk with them if they have specific requests and program. Always happy to take a look at it.
Well, higher education, for instance, did take a pretty substantial cut. And you've seen tuition raises already. The ASU system, for instance, decided to raise.
I think of all the places that could tighten their belt, higher education is certainly one. We pour hundreds of millions of dollars into higher education, and frankly, I think we need to focus a lot more on the outcomes than we are right now, and I would love to see us actually tighten the belt of higher education instead of throwing more money and getting less for it.
One more tax question here, and then we'll move on. And it's got a little political slant to it. There is a ballot initiative that's floating around out there to eliminate the sales tax on feminine hygiene products, diapers, some other things like that. Feels like a goodwill issue there. Do you have a position on that? Do you want to see some targeted tax relief maybe for some things like that that might make widespread sense?
I wouldn't be naturally opposed to helping on things that are high demand products like that are essentially required products that you have to have. However, I think the best place that we can really help provide not just relief, but really help reward and put incentives in the right place is by focusing on phasing out the income tax. When we zero in on that area, it really helps rise all boats. And so that's where I think we need to put our attention.
All right, there are a lot of potential ballot issues floating around out there. I don't know if you're going to be willing to give me a position on some of them, but I do want to ask about a couple of them. The education amendment that's out there, I know you've got some issues with that one. I know you have some issues with the abortion measure as well. Tell me what your opposition to those in the form that they're in right now. Why are you opposed to those two in particular?
Well, I think certainly on the education front, one, I think it would be extremely costly, and even those advocating for it can't tell you how much it will cost. But by the lowest estimate, it's at least $1 billion, likely more than that. And so I think that would be detrimental to our state's economy. I also just don't think it's good policy. And we have done a tremendous job through the passage of LEARNs of really focusing on things that matter specifically to student outcomes. We've really leaned into teacher pay and rewarding the hardworking people in the front of the classroom, not just with the base level salary, which was really important. And we moved from $36,000 to $50,000, taking Arkansas from 48th in the country to top 5 over the night. That's really important, but in addition to that, we focused on things like providing 12 weeks of paid maternity leave, tuition assistance for teachers, and in the next few days you will see the merit pay piece that was part of LEARNS, upwards of about $10 million go to north of 3,000 teachers across the state of Arkansas, some of them getting an additional about $10,000 bonus. So focusing on both empowering our teachers, empowering our parents through education freedom accounts. That's one of the things I'm really proud of, that we have been able to deliver for the people of this state so that parents have the ability to decide where and how their kids are best educated. Just in the first year alone of our education freedom accounts, which we're phasing in over the course of 3 years, in year one we had a little under 6,000 families participate in that, and over 50% of them are students with disabilities and special needs. That's a tremendous change and impact for families in all corners of the state. That's a big deal for a lot of people, for their student to now get the education that they need to really be successful. We focused on things like literacy coaches. We now have 125 literacy coaches in districts and schools across the state. We know that if a kid is not reading by the time they hit 3rd grade and meeting that most basic benchmark, we're setting them up for a lifetime of failure. And we're making real changes. I would hate to see something come in and totally disrupt the really great path that we are on here in the state of Arkansas in transforming education for the better.
Those education freedom accounts in year 3 become universal. I've seen some price tag estimates as high as $200 million a year for something like that if it's maximum capacity. That's a pretty big budget bite as well. Are you
far less than $1 billion, and it's also something that money has already been set aside and provided for, which would be totally different than the ballot initiative that's being put forward, where no funding has been set aside, and that price tag would, I think, significantly impact the state.
Yeah, I'm ready to see some economic impact and fiscal impact reports on that from both the legislature and the advocates for that measure. We'll see how they compare. So are you going to put something out about it? So.
I think that we've looked at some of the things that we do know, and we think at a minimum it will be at least $1 billion. So.
On the abortion amendment, I know you're extremely pro-life. I get emails from you every day from the Susan B. Anthony Foundation, so I'm quite familiar with your position. I know those in the pro-life movement are adamantly opposed, many are, to exceptions in those early weeks of pregnancy, which this abortion amendment proposes. But there are exceptions too for rape, incest, life of the mother. Do you think there should be some exemptions like for rape and incest? I'm
a big advocate for life, and I'm never going to apologize for being pro-life and for us as a society focusing on the most vulnerable demographic among us, and those are the unborn, and I'm going to continue to fight for Arkansas to be the most pro-life state in the country.
A child who's raped also needs protection too.
I don't think that there could be probably anything more awful or horrific or a more complicated situation, and certainly don't wish that decision on anybody. And I think that would be one of the most difficult things that we would have to face, but I'm always going to go on the side of life and protecting the unborn.
I'm just asking this personally, where does that conviction come from? I want to understand where.
I think for me as a parent, I think life begins at conception. I have seen the ultrasound and heard the heartbeat in the earliest weeks of pregnancy, and I think it's very hard to argue that that isn't a life and that we shouldn't protect it at every stage, whether it's in the womb, whether it's a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 25-year-old, a 55 or a 95-year-old. We are a culture that values life. In fact, I think it's one of the things that separates us from so many other societies around the world, is that we will do whatever we can to protect and uphold and value the sanctity of life. And when we start picking and choosing when we do that, I think that really takes away from who we are as a society.
Let's shift to some national politics in the short time that we have left here. You have endorsed former President Trump in this 2024 presidential election. You weren't the first one to endorse him, though. You held your cards for a little while before you put that endorsement out there. What were you waiting for?
Look, I've been a strong advocate for the president since the early 2016 campaign when I worked for him. I've been an outspoken supporter. I think there are very few people that you'll find that have been probably as publicly supportive of this president than I have. I feel very confident he's going to win in November. I'm proud of the fact that I get to stand and support him, and I look forward to him beating Joe Biden in November.
His legal woes do not complicate that endorsement for you at all?
No, I think that those are a total political distraction brought on by the Democrat Party, and most of those things, they're looking for a way because they can't beat him on policy. Because when you look at the matchup, this election is very different in many ways than previous presidential elections.
You have two people, it feels the same to me.
Maybe in some ways, but you have two people who have now actually served as president, and they have very clear records of what they have done in the office, not just what they've talked about, but what they've actually done. And I think in President Trump, you have somebody who has a record of success, and in President Biden, you don't. And I think it gets really easy for people when you break it down like that.
I'll let voters decide that one. If President Trump is reelected to office and he offers you a post or some sort of position to be with him, would you consider it?
Look, I love the job I have. I'm excited to be back in Arkansas. I think we're doing really great things, and I look forward to keeping this job for the next 6.5 years.
That sounds like a no to me.
That sounds like I'm going to stay where I am.
Okay, well that would be a no then. So, all right, a lot of people I think in this country would say, I would have a hard time finding someone that would say that our politics are not divisive right now. We have a very clean, even split in a political divide in this country. What do you think's at the crux of all that? How do you go about changing that divisive culture that's really, I think, tearing a lot of America apart?
You know, I don't think.
Both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, and I don't think the political division is new. It's always existed, but I think the way that we find unity and bring people together is focusing on issues that impact every demographic, every sector. I think education is one of those. It is something that impacts literally every person in the country, and so the more that we can focus on issues that I think can unify us and that can bring us together and that can break barriers, I think that's how we get over some of the political divide.
What's another issue besides education? Or do you think
one of the ones that I love to talk about and I think is really special and unique for Arkansas is our outdoor economy and outdoor recreation. I think the more that we can focus too on getting kids off screens and outside, not only is a great quality of life, but I think that social media and access to smartphones is probably one of the biggest challenges that we're facing in this country right now for young people. And the more that we can break that cycle and encourage kids to get out and experience God's beautiful creation, I think the better off we're going to be.
Is that something you should be legislating, though? Is that something that a parent should be controlling?
I certainly think parents need to be heavily engaged. And right now, I think what we can do is talk about it, make sure parents have awareness of just how dangerous it is. I mean, I think that it is in some ways equivalent to the way that we cut off access to cigarette smoking years ago. We put age limits on it because we knew it was dangerous. Kids aren't capable at a certain age of making a decision about whether or not they should have access to a lot of the things that you can find on social media. And one of the things I was very proud that we were able to do, and I'm going to continue to fight for, is the age restriction for anybody under the age of 16 to get on social media without parental permission. Not saying they can't have it, but that is empowering the parents to make the decision. But I think it's important for us to put safeguards in place, talk about the dangers of what's happening online, bring awareness to it, and look at every opportunity we can to help make sure people are aware of what's taking place around the country.
Always appreciate your time, Governor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All
Thanks
right.
for having me.
You bet.